Hello all, my name is Michelangelo and welcome to my channel. Today we are going to talk about the Yamaha FZ6R. So kind of a little bit of a background. So I've been riding for about 3 years now and I've had this bike for about a year. I've put 10,000 miles on it and the only modifications that I have is a fender eliminator, and like it's not even a fender eliminator, it's just like the pumpkin license eliminator in the rear, and I put in an undertail license and turn signals instead. And yeah, so today we're just going to go with the pros and cons after a year and 10,000 miles of riding this motorcycle. Starting with the cons, we have the appearance. So when the bike comes stock as a completely pumpkin like turn signal thing like all Yamahas do, and it just doesn't have a really good looking rear fender. And it, like, obviously that's what most people do on their motorcycles, is it just remove that rear fender or plate eliminator kit, whatever you want to call it, and they just replace it. Other than that, the bike looks fine. It has nice fairings. The headlights aren't too like bulbous or anything. They're not super stylish either, but this is also headlights that really, for the time, which mine was in 2009, for the time was pretty standard. So there's nothing you can really complain about that. Now, the main cons for the riding, though, is that you have limited suspension. A lot of people complain about the FZ09 having really soft suspension. Well, this bike is kind of the same way. So my preload right now is actually at, I think, either 5 out of 7 or 6 out of 7 on this motorcycle. And standard when it comes stock is like 3 or 4. It's just super soft. So if you were gonna do anything, I would just increase the preload a little bit, and other than that, it's pretty all right. Another thing too is that if you're a newer rider or if you're a rider that likes technology, this bike, at least my 2009, doesn't have any rider aids at all. It's just the bike and you, and just it's all manual glory. It's pretty, honestly, I don't really see a need for rider aids, at least not at this class of motorcycle or this style of motorcycle. It's just there's not a whole lot you can do with it. Like, for an example, like I can't pop a wheelie just out of the power of the motorcycle. So if I went full throttle in first gear, the front end's not coming up. So there's not really a need for like a wheelie control. I guess for traction control if you live in like a wet area, and like this bike doesn't have power modes. So at least this year of this motorcycle does not have power modes. So I guess if you wanted power modes for a 650 engine that's not a super sport, I don't know. I'm not the one to ask about that. Personally, I don't think, at least my bike doesn't need it, but maybe that'll be something different for you. The only other real complaint I have about it when it comes to actually riding the motorcycle is the lackluster horn. The horn doesn't do anything. Now, in most motorcycles, the horn doesn't do much anyway, and you just kind of have to avoid the car that's trying to merge into you or turn or whatever. But for the most part, I've definitely heard better horns on motorcycles. Now, I can't confirm if those horns were aftermarket or not, but in my experience, this horn that I have, at least on my 2009 Yamaha FZ6R, is pretty lackluster in comparison to other horns that I've seen. The real final thing about this motorcycle that I really dislike about it is that it's a very indecisive motorcycle. And what I mean by that is the riding position, which I'll talk about a little bit later when we talk about the commuting portion of this video, is fairly aggressive, right? It's not as aggressive as a super sport where you have the potential of a full tuck and, like, it's super lean forward and your butt's in the air, but it's more aggressive than like a standard naked bike. So for an example, if you were to sit on an FZ07 and then sit on a super sport, imagine the in between for that. And that part I really don't like, because it makes me feel like this bike can perform, which it can, right? It can perform, but it makes me feel like the bike is designed to go fast, and it doesn't. But also, like, I don't know, it's kind of hard to explain. So the best way I can put it is that it has the power of commuter bike, but it has the riding position that is more aggressive that you would want to do in like a super sport. Like, the way the riding position is, you expect the bike to have more power than it actually does. That could just be a me thing, but personally, that's the only real complaint I have about the bike is that it, at least for me, it gives a very indecisive feeling. The bike doesn't know what it wants to be. Luckily for y'all, the pros is a much longer list than the cons. So starting with the instrument cluster, we have an RPM gauge. Weird. I mean, that's nothing unusual. You actually get a fuel bar. You get the time if you set it. You get your engine temp, and then obviously your odometer, which has four different modes. You have your trip A, your trip B, your overall, and then when you hit your reserve tank, it actually switches to trip F, I believe, and it gives you how many miles you've been on your reserve, which is really nice. For commuting, the seating position, like I was talking about earlier, it's a little aggressive, but that benefits you on the highway because then since you're more leaned forward, the wind is more going over you, and it's a lot easier to resist the wind. And continuing onto the highway, if you're kind of worried about acceleration, it has decent torque. It's not the best. I think it has any normal torque of pretty much a 600cc engine that's not a super sport. So for an example, like this bike is easily comparable to the Ninja 650 if you've ever ridden that or if you've ever seen that bike around. They're very comparable. And it has about a top speed of 130. Now, does it take you to 130 really quick? Not really, but it's kind of nice knowing that you can go faster than the average speed of traffic. So in my area, the average speed of traffic on the interstate is about 80 miles an hour, and it's nice knowing that I have this large buffer before like I actually hit my top speed. So that way, in case I have to maneuver around someone or in case I have to get away from someone, I have that power. I'm not ringing the bike out at its top speed at 80, 85 miles an hour. That and because the bike is inherently faster, it just handles that speed really, really well. The power band sits in between 6 to 8,000 RPM. I believe the peak is 8,500, but like the perfect, for me anyway, the perfect torque to horsepower ratio is about anywhere from 6 to 8,000 RPM. And that's pretty much where I sit at on the freeway when I'm going 75, 80 miles an hour. At 80 miles an hour, I sit at exactly 7,000 RPM. And at 70, 75, I sit about 6.3, 6.5K RPMs. So it really just kind of depends on what you like. If you want a more torqueier bike, I would definitely stay away from an inline four. I would go towards a parallel twin, V twin, triple, or pretty much any other engine style. And then the one final thing I can say about highway riding on this motorcycle is that it has a windshield. It has a super sport style windshield, and it does help when you're in a normal sitting position. But when you get into that full tuck position, or as full tuck as you can get in a riding style that this bike presents to you, it does help a lot when it comes to the wind. It is a very noticeable change. And actually, if you full tuck on the freeway for your longer trips, you will actually notice a miles per gallon difference. And the final thing about this bike, about being a commuter bike as a whole, is that it has dual disc brakes in the front, which is fantastic. I like it because at least where I live, people love slamming on their brakes for no reason. Like I don't know how many times people have slammed on their brakes and like I have to swerve around them and there's literally nothing in front of them. Nothing at all. It just I guess people in my area don't realize that coasting is a thing or whatever, but there's two dual disc brakes in the front, so it has a lot of bite and you just don't have to worry about like locking up you still have to worry about locking up your front tire, but now you have this extra braking power so you don't have to brake as hard to get the same as much as you would in a single disc. Now when it comes to the beginner status of this motorcycle as a whole, again, like I said earlier, it's comparable to the Ninja 650, not the Ninja 636, which is a super sport, but the upright Ninja 650. It has a smooth throttle except for first gear. First gear, it's a little twitchy, so if you're a newer rider, it might be a little bit difficult to get used to, but once you get the fine motor skills to manipulate the throttle, then you'll be fine. Other than that, the rest of the gears, like, it's a really smooth roll on, and like it's not like the FZ09 where it's just like no power to all power. Like it's a very gradual increase in power. And finally, when it comes to the miles per gallon, I get about 40 miles to gallon, but I also kind of ride like an asshole, and that could be partly why people probably brake on me a lot. But and whenever I ride like an asshole, I ride above the speed limit. I aggressively switch lanes, as a police officer once told me. it's one of those things where I'm not cutting people off, but I am definitely utilizing the nimbleness of my motorcycle to get to where I need to be. I accelerate hard. I shift pretty frequently. I shift down for power and I shift up. Like it's pretty rare that I'm actually in my top gear the entire trip when I'm on the freeway. I'm usually shifting up and down consistently to get up into closer to the peak power band to pass someone or something like that. But yeah, if this is kind of a bike that you're interested in, leave a comment below if you have any more questions, and I will get it to you as soon as possible. Thank you for watching, and I appreciate your time. I'll see you in the next one.